This is the Ready Set Podcast, and here's your host, me, Joe Persinger. Hey, how was your week, you fucks? Are you Ready Set Podcast? What a show do we have for you this week? We are live on all of our podcast platforms. Please check us out on YouTube, Spreaker, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Well, this has been probably one of the most jam-packed weeks in a recent memory. We had the Super Bowl on Sunday, the Iowa the Caucus on Monday, the State of the Union was on Tuesday, and watching Nancy the Ripper Pelosi and her denture squirm with the rest of the Democrats, well, it was kind of entertaining. Wednesday, Trump finally gets acquitted by the Senate on both articles of impeachment. And apparently there's a debate going on Friday, which nobody's going to watch. So we are packed to the gills today. And I'm also going to explain, what am I doing? We're going to break down why cheating in Major League Baseball won't be the reason baseball goes kaput. And we're going to talk some NFL and free agency later on. All right, enough talking about it. This is your one-stop shop, current events and politics podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set. Are you ready? Set podcast! All right, so I've ebbed and flowed on this Major League Baseball cheating scandal. Yeah, I've seen both sides of the polarities put in their 2 cents, and I finally settled to what I think my opinion is. Well, it's not what I think. It is what my opinion of the situation is. So, this asteroid scandal has a few tentacles that have spread throughout Major League Baseball. You have Boston had to fire their head coach. I'm kind of in football mode here. Their manager, Alex Cora, he was, I think actually, Boston had a bit of their own cheating scandal, and he was Houston's bench coach during the 2017 season. Houston obviously had to fire their GM and manager. There's going to be an asterisk forever next to that 2017 World Series trophy and probably those AL championships that they won as well, especially the ones that they won at home. And the last tentacle reached all the way out to the New York Mets because they had to basically tell Carlos Beltran, "You're fired." And I'm doing that with the Trump point. You're fired. So a side note about the Mets, actually. Did anyone see what that snake Jessica Mendoza, who calls Major League Baseball games for ESPN, said? So we're going to go back to January 16th. It's about almost a month ago. She said, and honestly, now I should probably give context to this quote. She's talking about Mike Fears, who was the whistleblower for this Houston Astros scandal. And she's kind of talking about in context that she disapproves of what Mike Fears did. Here's the quote. "And honestly, it made me sad for the sport that's how this all got found out. I mean, this wasn't something that MLB naturally investigated or that even other teams complained about because they naturally heard about and then investigations happened. It came from within." Oh my. All right, so we're going to unpack that, if you will. So she says, I mean, it wasn't something MLB naturally investigated or other teams complained about. So she's saying because Major League Baseball didn't find out about it, other teams weren't complaining about it. That's I guess that's the crux of her issue. This is kind of like if, you're blowing up the neighbors' mailboxes, and because your mom or the neighbors didn't complain about it, that's why they have a problem with you doing it. I mean, there's a lot wrong with that metaphor, but let's just move past that. Now, here's what's really interesting. You're probably wondering, why the fuck does Jessica Mendoza give a fuck about Carlos Beltran being the manager for the Mets? Maybe it's a Hispanic thing. No. She actually works as an advisor to the Mets while retaining her job as an ESPN Major League Baseball analyst. Does anyone feel like there's a conflict of interest there? No? You might be wrong if you think there isn't. And most likely, in that advisor role, she's going to find herself within she probably is in the faction within the Mets organization that wanted to hire Carlos Beltran. Remember, she's a special advisor, so I mean, I don't know what her role is specifically, but if she's taking this stance, it's probably giving you a small peek into the way her mind organizes these thoughts. So why else would she take just such a stupid stance? Obviously, if she thinks Major League Baseball players look at her as an equal, I got a series of bridges on the Chicago River I'd like to tell you. Point being, she's just defending her spot within the organization. Hey, I'm a part of this silo that wanted Beltran here in the Mets, and I'm going to defend that. I'm going to die on that hill, so to speak. Anyway, moving back to the Astros scandal. So, a lot of people I've seen through the weeks are just up in arms, mostly Los Angeles Dodger fans. Don't hear the Washington National fans complaining because they beat the cheating team. Anyway, a lot of people have been saying, this is the end. This cheating scandal, this is going to do in Major League Baseball. Oh, is it? Well, let's go back about 100 years and look at, a few scandals through Major League Baseball. Well, let's start about 100 years ago. The Black Sox scandal. The Black Sox were throwing games. Is that like cheating? I mean, it's probably worse. Cheating. With cheating, zero integrity. When you have another team throwing a game so they can win money through illegal gambling, I don't know which one's worse. I mean, it's like 5 to the chest, 1 to the head. You pick. Then, it was about 30 years later or so in the 50s, you had the Bobby Thompson, the shot heard around the world. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that was the Giants cheating against the Dodgers, ironically. Not really. It's kind of funny. Fucking Dodgers. Remember, you fucks, you had Manny Ramirez in a steroid-induced home run in Wrigley Field. I don't want to hear about people cheating from you fucking Dodger fans. You guys are cheats too. The whole league's a bunch of cheats. Anyway, getting fired up here. Hasn't happened in a while. So Bobby Thompson hits the shot heard around the world, which was basically, I think it was like someone sitting in center field with, they had some way of communicating to them with some kind of it was like I don't know, I can't tell you, but it was basically like there was a sign on the board that would tell you what pitch was coming, and if it was a half circle, for whatever the fuck it was. But I believe they had somebody watching the catcher signs and were able to relay signs to the hitters, and thus the shot heard around the world. Okay, that's sign stealing. That happened almost 80 years ago, and the league still exists. And then what you had in the late 80s, Pete Rose betting on the Reds. So this is interesting. Cheating in 1920, sign stealing in the 50s. 30 years later, we're back to betting in Major League Baseball. And what I find interesting about that is, according to Pete Rose, he wasn't betting against his team. He was betting for his teams to win. Well, considering the Black Sox scandal, and who knows what other non-public scandals that have been in baseball, I forgot who's the guy that suspended him. Bart something. I forgot Bart's last name. Giamatti. That's Paul. Anyway, maybe it is Giamatti. I don't remember. But he blackballed Pete Rose for betting on himself and the Reds. Then you're going to fast forward, another 11 years later, 12 years later, and not even 8 years, 9 years later. Not even. It's like 6 years later. I would even say while this Pete Rose thing was going on, actually, if you read the book Juiced by Jose Canseco, in the late 80s when him and Mark McGwire were on the A's, which was around the same time, I believe his rookie year was Mark McGwire's, was like 88, 89. So that's right around the time Pete Rose is betting on the Reds. You have steroids being introduced into Major League locker rooms. And for those, actually we'll add another scandal to the list here. In 94, you have the strike. And I remember that. I was 12 years old. I was a huge White Sox fan. That 93 White Sox team was stacked. They were going to, I believe they would have probably won that 94 World Series. Although, if I remember correctly, they were struggling against that 93 Toronto team that had won the World Series previously before. However, that strike basically made me a Cubs fan. And it also set Major League Baseball back because what you had a bunch of players whining about, well, they kind of had they had a reason to strike. Regardless, the public perception didn't come across too well. So baseball was struggling for a little bit. And then, what do you know? People start hitting home runs. Steroids takes hold of the league. And in a bittersweet situation, it props up the league. But at the same time, kind of leaves it with a black eye. And then they finally got steroids out of baseball. Well, I mean, it's still kind of in the league, but not to where it was about 20 years ago. And now we're back to the Astros stealing signs. And that's also counting the Red Sox, who stole signs with an Apple Watch a few years ago. So, scandals are pretty prevalent in baseball, albeit especially in the last, 25, 30 years. But gambling and sign stealing, it's almost as apple pie as baseball. And that's just a fact that a lot of people who casually watch the league are just going to have to accept. But that's not the overall point here. When I say gambling has been around in baseball, I'm not talking back to about the Black Sox scandal in 1919. We're going to go on a little side journey here really quick. And I'm sure I've kind of alluded to this in past posts. I don't know if I've really done it on the podcast before, but I know on previous social media things I've done, I've discussed this. So everyone knows gambling in baseball was a thing in the 20th century. That's the 1900s. And even when MLB tried to snuff it out after, the Black Sox scandal, which we've talked about, and even went as far as to hanging signs in ballparks saying, no gambling, because, hanging a sign stops people from doing what people do. So we're going to go back to the 1906 World Series, the first ever crosstown classic, Cubs versus White Sox. The Cubs won 116 games that year, and it's still a record to this day based on the amount of games played. I believe back then they were playing on around the 150 mark of games, and now they play about $162. So based on a statistical percentage, they still hold the record. Now you can look in the record books, go back to 2001 and say, oh, but Joe, what about the 2001? I forgot which team it was. Seattle Mariners, coached by Lou Piniella, by the way. Again, 116 games out of 154, 52 is going to have a higher winning percentage out of 116 games out of 162. That's your math lesson for today. So, you have the most winningest team ever coming into the World Series against a White Sox team that came into the World Series hitting as a club at 226, something close to that at least. In other words, they didn't hit that well, but they had a stellar pitching staff. But everyone knows salaries in baseball back then were akin to having a second job nowadays. So the White Sox end up beating the heavily favored Cubs, and it came out of nowhere. A miracle, maybe? What's going on? Or did the Cubs throw the game? Yeah, that makes sense. That happened. It's possible. I don't know. Maybe the stellar pitching, maybe the stellar pitching that the Cubs were getting their first look at. Remember, these were two separate leagues back then. Interleague play that's only about 23 years old, 96, 97, I believe, when they introduced interleague play. And now even interleague play is even more than what it was 20 years ago. So, back then, this Cubs hitting lineup is getting their first look at a dominant, I guess they're, I think that, whatever, that's subjective, against a pretty good White Sox pitching staff. Now, this pitching staff, was it good? So you have good pitching, bad hitting, and one of the most, a high-powered team coming in that also had really good pitching too. I think, on that team, Three Finger Brown, I think was part of that pitching staff. I mean, you had Tinker's Ever Chance. I mean, the list goes on here. But the question is it the pitching staff that good, or is the greed from the players on the north side the tipping point? I don't know. I just find it too coincidental that 11 years after the 1906 World Series, the Sox win it in 1917. They wish they won it in 2017. They get screwed out of their bonuses from the team owner and cheapskate Charles Comiskey. Did they know something? So what I'm trying to say here is, yes, they had a great team. Shoeless Joe Jackson, Eddie Seacott. It's really only two guys I can remember off of that team off the top of my head here. But they win it God, I almost did it again. In 1917. And let's remember, Charles Comiskey, he's a cheapskate. And this is kind of talked about in 8 Men Out. That's a great movie if you want to kind of get more of a feel for the Black Sox scandal. One thing they did in 1919 was they didn't, like, Seacott had a bonus incentive in his contract that said if he pitched X amount of games, he would get, like, back then it was like a few $1,000 bonus, which was a lot of money 100 years ago. And what Comiskey does, he calls, he called down to the dugout or sent someone down, however the fuck they did it back then, and basically said, pull him out of the game and don't start him. I'm not paying him that bonus. So you have an owner that's notoriously cheap. You're a successful American League Baseball team going into your second World Series in, 3 seasons? And you played this other team that probably threw the World Series because you beat them out of nowhere. Anyway, that's just my opinion. I guess I'll kind of stop dancing around it. I feel like the Cubs threw that 1906 World Series because they knew there was no money in winning. A lot of people think the league was set up the way it is now. There was no money back then. Owners were cheap. And on top of that, there were 4 teams? Okay, it wasn't that little. But the league was extremely small. I mean, I want to say maybe 16 teams. I don't know. I'm not going to count that up right now. But it was a small team. It was an old boys club. Back then, owners were colluding to keep salaries down. And, there wasn't a lot of unions. I think unions were non-existent back then. If you spoke out, you got blackballed. So what was the best way to make yours in a time where you had to fight for every penny? I think you see where I'm going with this. Anyway, so the MLB has had its share of scandals through the years, and it's still here. The NBA found itself in hot water when it found one of its refs was possibly fixing games. It was fixing games. That was refereeing and simultaneously gambling on. The FBI even found that, I think it was Tim Donahue's shenanigans actually affected point spreads. That's a huge scandal. And it went away. The NFL suspended, this is in the 60s, Green Bay Packers, Alex Karras, and Paul Hornig for gambling on NFL games in 1963. But they were reinstated. And with the Black Sox scandal still somewhat visible in the rearview mirror. Remember, that's 63. That scandal is only about 40 years old. The NHL, the only thing I can really find is that the new Seattle team might call its hockey team the Seattle Kraken. Versus what has been being reported as calling themselves the Seattle Sockeyes. That's a dumb fucking name. All that nonsense aside, I think the real controversy here is that the NHL is adding a 32nd team. And that's fucking true. The Seattle Kraken, that's a badass name. If you fight that, something's wrong with you. It's all a bunch of Democrats up there, so it could have something to do with that. So here we have multiple leagues, multiple scandals, all involving some form of its players gambling, cheating, or both. And yet, after all these years, these pillars of American professional sports still stand. Baseball is slowly dying, like the Democrat Party, so their nonchalant attitude towards the crisis says 2 things. They believe they will weather this sign stealing scandal like they have in the past. And, they know better than you do. Just like the Democrats. How's that working out for them? Sign stealing, gambling, steroids, and more sign stealing. This is the DNA of Major League Baseball. Cheating. There's too much money in baseball for it to go away anytime soon. And there's definitely too much money in the game for these league executives to do the right thing. So if it was up to me, this is how I would handle this situation. And this is probably why I'll never be commissioner of Major League Baseball. I'd vacate the 1919 World Series that went to the Reds due to gambling and throwing of multiple games within the series. I'm vacating the 2017 Astros title. I'm vacating the 2018 Red Sox title. Lunhow, that's a GM for the Astros, Hinch, their former manager, Alice Cora, Beltran, all managers involved in this scandal that we talked about earlier, and any player found to be cheating, which would take place in a separate investigation, will be blackballed from the league. We're reinstating Pete Rose. And I would also send a memo to the city of Los Angeles explaining to them they need to grow a fucking sack Fucking computer. Always fucking with me. Kills my momentum. They need to grow a fucking sack and shut up. And I would also send a message to any team thinking about cheating again. I'm going to ban Houston from the postseason until 2023. Yeah, you might as well just call me the NCAA. All right, let's see. Moving on to our next one here. So the Super Bowl was on Sunday. I honestly didn't mean for that to turn into a 20-minute rant about cheating in baseball. I really want to just talk about the week, but I've been kind of silent on that subject. So this was one hell of a Super Bowl this week. I mean, you had Jimmy G and his power running offense versus a high-flying, high-powered offense led by a young star, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, this whole game, it was a giant knife fight. It was gash after gash after gash. San Francisco had control for the first half, but the signs were there that this offense was struggling. I mean, the first possession of the game took more than 5 minutes off the clock, but only produced 3 points. I'm a Bears fan. I see that all the time. That's not good. And then you have Jimmy G. He throws a duck that left you thinking, what was he thinking? And then the halftime show. I mean, I'm kind of going over the whole thing really quickly here. The halftime show, oh, you know what I'm talking about. Not a fan of those subtle political acts that were woven into the spectacle, but the PG-13 strip show definitely made up for it. I just gotta love, how women say, don't objectify women, and then we have a Super Bowl halftime show like that. But that's a Democrat for you. And then the other question is, I mean, if you're A-Rod and you're sitting out there in the crowd watching that rump roast shake, I bet you're thinking, I know what we're doing when I get back to the house. Because I think they probably have a house or two in Miami. And I'll also be honest, the commercials this year, they were pretty tame. No one really seemed to take a risk. It was all very, let's play to everybody's non-laughing emotions. Google. I mean, if I want to watch a Super Bowl commercial, I want to laugh. Not think about my impending death. Fucking Google. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, I mean, the Super Bowl ads, D+. We're going to go D+. Anyway, that fourth quarter, we finally saw some fireworks and another epic Kyle Shanahan collapse reminiscent of 2017. Run the ball when you have the lead, brother. Going into the week, everyone was talking about, the matchup being Kansas City's offensive line against the 49ers defensive line. But, there were two variables on the San Francisco side no one really accounted for. And in their defense, how could you? Shanahan is probably going to be known as a problematic play caller in big games. Again, run the ball, brother, when you got the lead, especially in big games. And Jimmy G might not be the clutch pure passer some thought he would be after sitting behind Brady all those years. First of all, he throws two ill-advised ducks. And in the biggest moment of his life, in a fourth quarter drive where he had Emmanuel Sanders with at least 2 steps on the safety, overthrows him. Again, as a Bears fan, I've seen plenty of that this year. And let's be honest here. This is a passing league. And this is kind of going towards San Francisco. So you have, look at the eye test. I always go back to the eye test. Does it pass the eye test? You watch what Kansas City was doing with how they were passing the ball. They have so much speed that they're impossible to defend. Kansas City has so much speed that you have to give their wide receivers soft coverage, basically giving them a really big cushion because you don't want them to burn you. I mean, you're going to be giving up, big yard chunk plays doing that. And when you see a team the way like San Francisco built, I mean, they look great. Hey, Jimmy G only passed the ball 8 times against Green Bay. Shouldn't that leave you with a bit of a question mark considering this is a passing league? I mean, in the 80s and 90s, you would see teams building high-powered running attacks complemented by a tough blue-collar defense. Think the Chicago Bears, circa 1985. But nowadays, no general manager seeks to build his team into a powerhouse defense around a running game with a pure passing quarterback. It just doesn't make any sense. If you have a quarterback that can pass like Brady, Breeze, whichever, or Mahomes, and you have the weapons, and even if you don't have the weapons, good quarterbacks like that tend to elevate receivers. See Brady and Julian Edelman, Wes Welker. So do you think that John Lynch set up the team to be that way perfectly? So in other words, he built the team into this powerhouse defense that has this running game and this guy that could just pass the ball purely whenever he feels like it or whenever the defense dictates it or allows it. Do you really think he did that? I don't think so. I think what we have here is an unfortunate situation for San Francisco where they've been masking a lot of the flaws of Jimmy G. Again, I look at the play. Emmanuel Sanders has at least 2 steps, and if Jimmy G puts that ball in the right spot, I don't really know if Kansas City wins this game. Maybe they come back from that. I don't know. There's a lot of variables in this situation, but the point is, those are the passes you have to make specifically in those situations in that game. So I think what we have here is Jimmy G is an exposed game manager. If he wasn't, why are they running the ball 200, 300 yards against Green Bay? Why are they only letting Jimmy G pass it 8 times? If he's this pure passer that is Brady-like, why isn't he passing the ball 30 to 50 times a game? Sure, Kansas City, they have a good defense. But it's obvious Shanahan has been using the San Francisco run game to mask Jimmy G's flaws, or worse, he doesn't trust his quarterback in big moments. Again, I'm a Bears fan. I know when I see things like that. And if that wasn't the case last Sunday, it's going to be going forward. Overall, not a bad Super Bowl, but they got to step up the commercial game next year. Woo! Okay, so now we're moving on to the Iowa debacle. Democrats. They want to run your life. They want to run your health care. There are certain factions within the party that want to nationalize various industries and have the government be in charge of running them. Have you ever been to the DMV? How's all that bureaucracy and long lines working out for you there? Now, take all those headaches at the DMV and imagine you're trying to buy groceries in a government-run business. No profit, no creativity. Anyone remember what it's like trying to buy government-supplemented insurance? Didn't the website crash? And when it comes time for the state Democrat Party out of Iowa to set the tone for the national party, well, they botched it. No results were released Monday night. By Tuesday at 5 p.m., they only released 62% of the total accounted vote. By Wednesday, at the same time, which is about 5 p.m. Eastern, that number had only grown by 13%. Only 75% of the vote had been released. Ugh, think about that. In a 48-hour period, the Democrat Party had only released 3/4 of the Iowa Caucus vote. And just so you know, they don't release total vote numbers like the Republicans, who keep it simple, said 31,000 people voted for Trump, X amount, whatever. Where the Democrats hide vote totals for whatever reason. I mean, you can make your own conclusion there. They just do state delegate equivalents, SDEs, and then they give you the percentage of the vote. It's all fucking screwy. Thus, the Iowa Circus. And these Democrat fucks want us to vote them into power, into the most powerful office, if anything. Are you fucking delusional? But as the vote totals started trickling in, and it was obvious there would be no winner, the dirty side of politics made an appearance. Amy Klobuchar ran to the microphone to declare victory, but she ended up in 5th place. And then that caused all the other politicians, Biden, Buttigieg, Warren, Sanders, to run to their respective mics like a gaggle of horses being released from the starting gate. Then they all got on a private jet and headed to New Hampshire. That's how they felt about Iowa. But the results, they're pretty interesting. Biden ends up with 15 points. And now, I think all the votes are in now. When I wrote all this, it was maybe like 95% of the vote. So maybe there's a bit of a total vote count, or difference in number from what I'm stating here, but they're right there in the ballpark. So Biden ends up at 15.78% of the vote and puts him in 4th place, only a few percentage points ahead of Amy Klobuchar, who ended up with 12.5. And if you're not sure, Amy Klobuchar is a nobody senator from a nobody state, Minnesota. Actually, I should take that back because Trump's going to go after Minnesota, so they might flip Minnesota red this year. We'll see. Buttigieg looks like he's going to win this debacle clown circus of a Democrat-run caucus with 26.2% of the vote. When I wrote this, I only had Sanders at 26.07, but I think he ended up winning the popular vote and ended up with another, 0.03 percentage points, rounding him out at 26.1. So it's almost a virtual tie between him and Buttigieg. Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, rounded out the whole thing in third at 18.16% of the votes. Like I said, this was written on Thursday, so numbers might be a little skewed there because I think the whole thing has come out since. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen with some of these less than 1% support, with these candidates that have 1% or less, and where that support's going to go. I don't really think all that redistribution of support will prop anyone up. Maybe it will. I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. So I'm not a sabermetric pollster expert, but going by the raw percentage numbers here, we have some interesting things going on. So the socialist wing, which is Sanders plus Warren, equals 44.23% of Democrats that showed up to caucus. And I mean, again, when I wrote this, I wasn't really sure where Mayor Pete falls. I know in the beginning, he was trying to take up that moderate lane, but some of his platforms are definitely on the socialist leftist side. I mean, he might be not as socialist as Bernie and Warren are in the lane Bernie and Warren are in, but he's, maybe a tick or two to the right of them. Either way, when you add all those numbers together, it starts getting a little where was I here? So basically what you have is when you add Mayor Pete to that number of the electorate, it balloons from 44.2 to 70.4. So you have 2/3 of the Democrat Party in Iowa is voting for socialists or socialist-like policies. That's got to leave some corporate and established Democrats a little worried. I mean, the other side of it is the rest of it is just the moderate lane and then all the 1%ers, and that represents 29%. That's got to scare the shit out of these establishment and corporate Democrats. Little side note here, you got Hillary being like, "Oh, vice president, I'll be vice president." And I'm going to quote James Wood on this. If you're going to put Hillary a heartbeat away from the presidency, you might as well sign your will. That was a great line, James. So good luck to the National Democrat Party. Impeachment ended with a piff. That's from Calvin and Hobbes. That's the sound a snowball makes when it hits someone in the face. Piff. Socialists are definitely taking over the Democrat Party. The Iowa State Democrats just botched the kickoff vote of the year. And Trump just keeps winning. Now I'm going to say Trump's a liar. This is going to surprise a lot of people that I'm saying this. He is a liar. Not only was he horribly off the mark about this, but his deception in the campaign season about this really has me upset. I am not sick and tired of all this winning. So that kind of brings us to impeachment. Again, this is another thing I'm kind of silent on just because it's so fucking wonky. But let's, break this down really quick. Maybe we'll go into the free agency thing. I think I probably will. But let's do impeachment really quick. Our Teflon in chief, he's dodged his third attempted coup via the Nancy the Ripper and her puppets? Russia. The Mueller report and failed impeachment. Totally acquitted. And who knows what else is coming around the corner when this zombie wakes back up. The fallout of this failure to acquit and get anything done will be interesting and to watch unfold until this year's election. Nancy the Ripper acquired her power by strategizing moderate platforms in suburban Trump districts. So basically what she did is they targeted all these suburban red districts that Trump won in 2016, and they said, hey, we're going to send moderate Democrats in there, and they're going to run on healthcare, competent governing, which is kind of ironic considering how the Democrats botched the Iowa elections. And just so you know, the DNC okayed the plan that was presented to them from the Iowa Democrat Party. Then various moderate platforms, depending on the district or state, but mainly messaging that they are going to get stuff done while taking on Donald Trump. They made a bunch of promises, and it looks like they failed to deliver. So will these suburbs still vote to keep these Democrats, some who vowed to not impeach, in power? The path to the gavel is the suburbs, and Trump's numbers are through the roof. People are bored with impeachment. Is this really, really possibly the end to Pelosi's career, speakership even? Is she really going to want to go out like this? Is her legend going to be Nancy the Ripper and her failed impeachment strategy? Now, she did say when she was elected to the speakership that, kind of with a wink, wink, nod, nod, that she would only serve one term. But we all know how, corporate established Democrats are. They're like the old Russians of the Marxist days. They just refuse to let go of power. So the Democrats, outside of looking unhinged at times, are imploding. They've elevated these three socialists to the top of the party. Conservative Democrats are a thing of the past. Biden can't run for president, let alone get out of Iowa alive. I think he's fourth in New Hampshire as we speak. And the Democrat voter turnout was, 50,000 short of what was expected in Iowa? Is there an enthusiasm problem with the Democrats? I don't think you'll find this lack of enthusiasm on coast states like California, Oregon, Washington, New York. But you need middle America if you want to win the White House. Election 2020. It's 9 months away. It's already starting to heat up. All right. So let's bust out some NFL and free agency talk. In all my years watching the NFL, I have never seen an offseason where the quarterback market falls into a buyer's market. For as many years as I can remember, the quarterback market was always a seller's market. It always benefited the team that had the quarterback, but now we just have a glut of quarterbacks hitting the market. Brady, Breeze, Bridgewater. I think Alex Smith is a part of this class. Marcus Mariota, Phillip Rivers, and a few others are going to be available. Tom Brady is obviously will be the most looked at, most followed. Will he stay in New England? Is New Orleans really going to let Breeze get to the market? I guess he's going to take this month and decide. What are the Chicago Bears going to do with Mitch Trubisky? No one gives a shit about the Cowboys. Who cares? That's how I feel about that. But, they probably will franchise tag Dak Prescott. Tampa's in the same position. And same question goes for the Titans and Ryan Tannehill. So usually every year, it seems to be some kind of coaching carousel, which is taking place to an extent. But this year, it's all about the QBs, baby. So here's my 4 pillars of free agency. The first one. The Brady situation seems to be divided into 2 camps. Brady is staying or Brady is going. The going faction seems to think he might be going to Dallas, Tampa, or Nashville. And that's going to be your, corporate media sports channels. Breeze, I'm really curious to see where this domino falls. Like I was just saying, he's going to take the month and then let New Orleans know what he's going to do. So I don't know if that means he might retire. He might want to stay. Then, what do they do? What was that? That guy they drafted, number 7, Taysom. I think his name's like Taysom or something like that. I could be way off about that. Are they going to keep, Breeze and Taysom? Or, I think the guy they drafted is staying. So it's a matter of Breeze or Bridgewater. Which way do they go? And I guess Breeze might have a say in that. So these 3 quarterbacks, Breeze, Rivers, and Brady might be. That's right. Did I say Rivers might be? I think Rivers has been linked to Tampa. I think he just moved his family here to Florida. It's anyone's guess, just like this segment. So these 3 quarterbacks might be older veterans, but they're accurate passers who can turn mediocre receiving cores into a quiver full of weapons. Bridgewater. Now here's a key. I believe he was, 5-0 in his first 5 or 6 games. Showed some great footwork, mobile in the pocket, showed off some good accuracy. So, Bridgewater, that's an interesting one to the Bears. Or just anywhere, really. I just don't know. I'm skeptical. I liked what I saw, but I believe New Orleans had a nice amount of weapons. So we have Tannehill, Prescott, and Winston. I think they're going to probably stay in their respective places. Teams tend to use the franchise tag, especially with quarterbacks, and I think that's going to be the situation for these 3. Maybe Tennessee breaks from Tannehill, but if you're looking to go to that team as a free agent, you're really not going to think twice about how they are treating the guy that helped them get to the AFC Championship if they cut him or not extend him that franchise tag at the very least. I think Bridgewater is going to stay in New Orleans. I think you're going to see Rivers go to Miami because Tampa Bay is going to keep Winston. Cam Newton's going to find new life in Cincinnati. Mariota is going to go to the Panthers. And here's the second hottest take of the day. Breeze gets signed to a short-term deal in New England. Uh-oh. And here comes the hottest take of hot takes. Brady will play under center for the Chicago Bears. Yeah, that's a hot take and homer alerts. So while we're on the topic of sports really quickly, what the hell's going on with the Cubs? Are they really going to trade Chris Bryant? Put me in the don't fucking do that camp. So Mookie Betts just got traded this week, and I guess that's kind of set the market for superstars. But what's going on here? I understand the strategy behind trading him. You can move a guy that's going to have a big salary that's coming up in the next 3 years or so. You might lose him to free agency. You can get a nice, what's the word I'm looking for? You can get more back for him, opening up the championship window a little bit more. I get all that. But you have to weigh that versus what is out there. What's out there? Here's one I keep seeing that just like, this is why I just can't deal with ESPN anymore. I mean, I like Jesse Rogers, follow him on Twitter, read his articles, but good God, they must write this shit because they need the clicks. So I keep seeing this, like a few months ago, it was Chris Bryant might get traded to Atlanta. And then they were kind of listing off the various packages they think that would come out of that. But that's not happening. They signed Ozuna to a contract. So now the big talk is, I think there was a discussion about Los Angeles. Again, that would have been stupid. And that's not happening. They have Mookie Betts now. So now the big one has been about doing a swap with Colorado or Arenado for Chris Bryant. Just 1-for-1. And this is just mind-boggling. Why the fuck would anyone even consider that? Considering the whole idea behind Chris Bryant is you're trying to get out from underneath signing the guy to a fuckload of money. So the answer to that is to trade for a guy that has a contract that's fully loaded with a fuckload of money. And then on top of that, he can opt out of that in the 2021, going, I think, into the 2021 season. This makes no sense. Why would you do that? So you're going to trade for a guy to possibly rent another guy for a year, and you're not even guaranteed that this guy's going to be any good. I mean, he hits in Colorado. The air is like the Martian atmosphere up there. Unfucking real. Don't trade Chris Bryant. Just see what you got this year. If you're going to do absolutely nothing, just do nothing. Okay, you got a new coach. Let him fucking work out the problems. If it gets really bad, make some moves in July. But dear God, don't fucking trade Chris Bryant going into the season. Probably, I bet this is... Okay. So then at the Cubs convention, Ricketts gets booed. He can't figure out why. And then a report comes out that the Cubs ownership thinks the Cubs fans owe them more patience or some shit like that because they pulled all the stops back out in 2016. You fucking kidding me? You won one World Series in 108 years, and you think I owe you patience? I'll tell you what, if they won back-to-back, I'd maybe give you that. Maybe. You won one World Series in 4 fucking years. Obviously, you're trying to run a business. You're trying to set up a regional sports network because that's basically printing money. I get it. But that attitude is not the right way to go about it. And again, that was a report. But, again, you think how go into the egotistical mind of a billionaire owner, albeit a Republican that supports Trump. So I'm trying to, walk slowly here. So it looks like we have an owner here that's pulled out all the stops right as he bought the team and now is kind of paying attention to what seems to be his own agenda and building his business. Probably going to be a long season. Who am I kidding here? All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for listening to Ready, Set Podcast. Please check us out on Spreaker, give us a like and a follow. Check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. It really helps get the podcast out there. And just a reminder to everyone, you can now find the podcast on CastBox, Podcast Addict, Google Podcasts. That's right, we've gone to the dark side. And don't forget, we are also on iHeartRadio. I think I said Apple Podcasts already. Anyway, this is your one-stop shop, current events and politics podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set. Thanks for listening. Please share the podcast if you'd like to support us, and we'll see you next week, you fucks. Thanks for listening to the Ready, Set Podcast. Check us out next week, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter, and look for us on our YouTube channel, Ready, Set Podcast.